Okay, that transition wasn't quite so smooth, but boom! Welcome to Tokyo Tonight. I'm Miko Simon. We are back for what I just realized is going to be the final show of the year, because I am heading off to Australia later this week, which will be awesome. It's always nice. We just had the solstice, the shortest, darkest day of the year in the northern hemisphere, which is also the flip side in the southern hemisphere. It's the longest day of the year, and it is always really nice to get down to the southern hemisphere at the time that it's just getting coldest and darkest in the northern hemisphere. So yes, I'll be down in Australia, which is good. The bad news is, of course, that I'll have Australian internet speed, so I doubt I'm going to be able to post while I'm down there, but I'll see if I can make some tunes, and I'll have some fun down there. I'll be back January 6th, so I guess I'll be back from that second week of January. Was looking through the topics. There are a few topics this week. It should have occurred to me this was the last show. I could have done like a year in review or something like that. I do intend, as a result of that, to sort of try to go through the show topics quickly tonight. As always, if you want to get me to talk about anything in particular that you think would be fun, it would be, I'd actually welcome that tonight. So seriously, like, throw up at Miko Simon so that I noticed, and throw out topics that you'd like me to talk about. I'm happy to do that. Certainly, I'm kind of interested to hear how 2018 has gone for everybody. I know that lately people have been talking about every year being a sort of a dumpster fire or whatever, and I kind of get that, but at the same time, I think you've got to try to be a little bit optimistic. I think whatever your perception of the world tends to, shape it in some ways, and I don't know, I think there's been a lot of really cool things in 2018 myself, and I'd like to hear how it's been good for everybody else and what we're looking forward to in 2019, not just what sucked. A few things which actually aren't in the topics, including what's in the title. I just thought I had to put that on because tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Today's actually Happy Emperor's birthday. I think I've called this the Emperor's birthday special in the past. So it's actually today, and the Emperor did the speeches and all that sort of stuff. It'll be the last Emperor's birthday with the current Emperor. I think what will probably happen from next year or the year after is that for each Emperor, the Emperor's birthday, and we had this with the Showa Emperor, with Hirohito, then when he died, his birthday became Green Day or Showa Day or something, and the new Emperor's birthday became the Emperor's birthday, which is the 23rd of December. So when we get the new Emperor next year, this will probably just become another public holiday. And you can see where this goes. Once we get through 365 emperors, we won't have to work anymore. So, I know there's some people holding out, hoping that's going to happen quickly. But yes, because this falls on a Sunday this year, it means that the Monday tomorrow is, although it's not actually technically the Emperor's birthday, we're getting a day off in Japan. So we're actually getting Christmas Eve off because of the wrong-headed way that I've talked about before. Well, you know what, that's not fair. To say that Christmas is done wrong in Japan is pretending that we do it right. And, as much as we talk about how, religious people talk about how Christmas has been commercialized and it's been taken over by companies, and then Westerners talk about how Japan's taken over Christmas and is sort of doing it like another Valentine's Day with somehow Kentucky Fried Chicken mixed in, which doesn't really make sense. But if you go all the way back, it's not like the Christians invented Christmas. I mean, I know they call it Christmas and technically they sort of labeled it, but they were slapping another label on pre-existing pagan festivals. So you can look at this as just another progression of Christmas, that sooner or later it was going to end up somehow in a love hotel with Colonel Sanders. How they got the fried chicken in with the whole dating thing, and this whole misinterpretation of solemn hymns and hymn singing as feeling sorry for people without dates, I don't know. But you know what, I mean, as I've said before, Japan is a great country for being single. I think that's what's contributing to all of that. Oh no, my air server. Boom, let's get the topics back up. Quinn Rankett, good to see you. I'm going to say hello to everybody, but suggestion, Patreon and their new trust and safety deplatforming of people. I wonder how many J-vloggers will be affected. Good topic. I'm not that knowledgeable about it, actually, so I don't know. I can't say a lot about it. But yes, I will try to come back to that, so remind me of that later. Let's just quickly go and see who's in the comments, by the way. I always do go through this in the beginning, and hell, it's the last show, so let's see. We've got James Kelly, good to see you. Hi indeed. We've got the J-Vlog, yes, Merry Christmas. We also have Azumanga Deva, good to see you. We've got Kang and Kodos, good to see you. Thank you for the thumbs up. I did put on some pre-show tunes, and we might even do some post-show tunes today, because why not? It's the last show of the year. Sergeant Bilko, good to see you. Tai Nakamura, boom, early in the morning there in the US. Thank you for dialing in. We got who else we got here? Mr. Cordy Chep, 2018, the year the video game companies decided they were going to antagonize their customers with slurs and mobile games and crappy bags. I like mobile games, you know, they're marketing to me. I'm your problem. Who else we got here? Quinn Rankin, good to see you. Shizen Taisu, boom, indeed, good to see you. We've got Chris Jack, we've got Lysander 45, happy birthday to the Emperor. Indeed, the Wahei period coming up, as we're all hoping it's going to be. Shizen Taisu, a lot of people, it's just kind of a fun thing, you see all the blogs always saying. Certainly 2017 got the dumpster fire thing, and people talk about every year lately like that. I don't look at things that way, but I see people doing that. We've got Narudu in Japan, good to see you. Long time no see, actually. Narudu in Japan, good to see you. We got Jen Carlos Sainz, good to see you. So whenever I see your name, Sainz, but I always think of the rally racing driver. I think it's I always think of Carlos Sainz. Again, I used to be into World Rally Championship. But welcome. Who else we got in here? We've got lots of people in here anyway, but and indeed Lysander 45 pointing out that Christmas is purely commercial there in China, to the point where it has banned Christmas decorations for intruding upon secular values imposed by the CCP. Which is kind of funny. I mean, I think it's actually kind of nice that they actually consider all the commercialism still to be religious, when obviously it's not. And I'm not exactly sure what the criteria that Patreon is using, and whether that might slap Tikyo Sam or others or not. So I guess I'd have to look into that, and so I'm not well enough versed on that ahead of time. In terms of, for those of you who don't know, Christmas in Japan is it's a bit weird when you're here. For us, Christmas generally where I come from is travel, meet all the relatives. It's a bit like a US sort of Thanksgiving kind of a concept for us. It's sort of, you know, families getting together, having a Christmas dinner usually in the middle of the day, usually outside. Have a bit of a barbecue, jump in the pool, go to the beach, watch a cricket match. Of course, midsummer where I grew up, where Christmas is. But hey, Jace Mackey, good to see you. Coming to Japan, of course, that said, I know what Christmas looks like, at least in UK and America, because, well, at least to the extent that all of our television and movies in New Zealand and Australia is nothing, on TV we see nothing but snow through the whole Christmas season, because we don't really, it looks weird to us to see our own Christmas like in a movie. It doesn't really make sense. But I've got an idea of what the US version is like. So the Japanese version, however, the idea of getting together with families, if you explain it to Japanese people, it's a bit like obon, which is when you go and see the relatives and you go and tend after the family graves and stuff like that. Not exactly a time that you would eat Kentucky Fried. You would on the family grave side perhaps, but you wouldn't really go on book a love hotel on obon. I guess some people probably do, but you know. And again, genius by Kentucky Fried Chicken getting the chicken in there, but not quite sure how that happened. Is it racial slurs that will get you off Patreon? Well, if that's the case, I kind of agree with it. Why do you need to do that? That would just be stupid if that were the case. I mean, even humorously, even like fun or whatever, no need to do that. I don't really get that. If that's all that it is, then to me it's nothing. And if they get kicked off, they deserve it. Sergeant Bilko, bless, snow shoveling, you like snow, but not on your sidewalk driveway, indeed. Did we see the Lovot? It's really cool looking. I'm not sure I know what the Lovot is. I've got an idea from what it sounds like, but I'd probably best not. What's the Lovot? Giancarlo Saints, I'm not sure. Anyway, put that in there, and good to see you all. Let's get into the topics and see where we go with this. By the way, Quinn, feel free to drop in some more information there about the Patreon trust and safety deplatforming of people, and I can probably talk to it. Yeah, that's what I thought it was, Sergeant Booker. Well, why not, I guess. But yeah, hey, Bradley Ford, just good to see you. Just be indeed good to see you tonight. And yeah, let's get into it. Oh my god, it's so cute. Loving robot. Oh, it's not a love robot, it's a loving robot. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that. Well, you can see the way that my mind works. Anyway, into the subject, and this is important while we're talking about Christmas in the beginning. Um, Die Hard. Oh, Bradley Ford, and you're prepping for Christmas in Geelong. Nice. I used to live near Geelong, which is right in the bottom of Australia. I used to live in Point Lonsdale, which is about half an hour, 45 minutes drive from Geelong, but that's where the big Ford factory was. I think it still is, but they're closing that down, right? But there you go. Anyway, so question, what do you think about this? Apparently Bruce Willis has actually gone on the record as saying he does not consider Die Hard to be a Christmas movie. To me, it's not only a Christmas movie, it is like the best Christmas movie ever, and its distributor apparently is in disagreement with Bruce Willis. Look, I'm always going to love Bruce Willis for one, making receding hairlines fashionable, or at least somewhat cool, for making Die Hard 1 and Die Hard 2, which I think are two. I can't think of a better action movie ever. There are good action movies, but like nothing so transformative as Die Hard was. Like just a simple yet perfect kind of formula of that movie. Hey Andrea, my boy, good to see you. Merry Christmas. Yeah, it's sort of like, it's such a great movie, and just the fact that it's set during Christmas at the same time. Well, I don't know that I'd consider The Godfather to be an action movie. That's what I mean. But yes, Scrooge. no. I think the idea that, you know, having Bruce Willis here like describe Die Hard as clarifying that it's not a Christmas movie. Everybody, it reminds me of the inventor of the GIF, who went and felt like he needed to end the GIF versus GIF debate by telling everybody, okay, it's pronounced GIF, GIF. And he invented it, so that should resolve it, except obviously the person's wrong and has possibly lost his mind, and how could you even say that? And that's what I feel about Bruce Willis, saying that Die Hard isn't a Christmas movie. Be quiet, you know, lest we stop loving you. So thank you, Bruce Willis, for the Christmas movie, and stop calling it a Christmas movie. Although Sergeant Bilko, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation is also pretty good. Revenge of the Nerds. I must admit, even when I was a kid, I found Revenge of the Nerds kind of disturbing. Well, obviously a lot of people did. But I was kind of like, really? I was like 9 years old when they were showing that on TV. Like, they were showing Revenge of the Nerds on TV, and obviously they're trying to pretend like nobody ever made it now. Is that a Christmas movie? Scrooge is kind of good. I don't know that I can even remember Miracle on 32nd Street. I don't know about that, but yeah, you just reflect. Sometimes I just have moments where I reflect back on that movie, and it's like, yeah, that was actually extremely illegal and weird and not funny. And how could anyone even think that that was okay? The 80s were a simpler time, and more complicated perhaps as well. Now this is interesting. Train etiquette, a survey done of what Japanese people consider to be bad behavior on trains, and this is a pretty good indicator. And I'll tell you what, I've been guilty of some of these behaviors, and but the point is, if you do them, you should be a little bit self-aware and at least feel guilty. So this is it's a top 10 list, but it's worth going through, because if you're coming to Japan, these are things that travelers often don't have any idea. So of course on the platforms they've got kiosks with beer and food, and people go, great, I can drink beer and eat food on the trains and talk loudly and have fun because I'm traveling in a foreign country. I've been with those guys, and the answer is no, stop, no, don't. Not that nobody does it. Of course, sometimes you see it, but this is basically what those people are being thought of when they do that. So first one is eating food in crowded trains. Don't do it. I mean, sometimes you'll be eating something on the platform and you got one more bite, and sometimes you have a Snickers bar and okay, one bite or finish it on the train. But you're not supposed to do that. People don't like the idea. You might spill some chocolate on the seat, and then someone else has got to sit there. You're going to drop food, you're going to drop crumbs. It's just annoying, it's disgusting, and you don't do it. And yes, indeed, Lysander 45, we're getting to that one as well, so don't do that. Leaving trash or empty cans lying around, well, I mean, that's just unthinkable, actually. You look at how clean the trains are. People just don't do that shit, so please don't do that. And yeah, Naruto in Japan, you've seen some people eating onigiri on the train. You see some kids doing that or whatever. Generally speaking, people are very careful, at least if they do it. And it's not saying that no one does it. The point is, obviously things do it, because this is a survey of things that the majority of people, in this case, 10% of people, not everybody, But a lot of people identify eating food in crowded trains as being behavior that they consider to be inconsiderate towards other people. So this is the point. It's not that people don't do it. If they didn't do it, it wouldn't be on the list. But the point is that when you do it, you're going to get dirty looks from 1 in 10 people, according to the survey, because it's considered to be inconsiderate. What else have you got here? Leaving trash, obviously don't do that. Putting makeup on. So again, this is pretty common on trains, but it also annoys a lot of people. There have actually been incidents. I remember where, for example, an old lady told off like a young woman putting her makeup on the train, and the young woman like attacked the old lady and got arrested and so on. So you know, it can get pretty ugly sometimes as well, but this definitely happens, particularly when you're on the suburbs that go out from way out in the suburbs. So you gotta, like, you know, ride on the train for 1.5 hours. People try to save their time by trying to get their makeup done, you know, on the train rather than in the house before they leave, like if they're late for work or whatever. But yeah, that's considered super bad form. It smells bad, and yeah, you know, you just don't want to do that. Boom. Just drop the phone. Next one is riding the train drunk. Well, of course you can't really avoid it, but certainly being a drunk person on a train generally is noticeably drunk, like not able to sit up properly, at risk of throwing up. It's not good form again. People do it. It's not that people don't do it, but it's not considered good form, so there you go. Walking while using smartphones, basically looking at your smartphone. I do this all the time, but of course it's super annoying to have someone bump into you or get in your way while they're distracted looking down at their phones, and it's getting to be, people really dislike that. Another one people have to be careful of, you know, these people who wear headphones and they think that you know, they're in a cone of silence and they can turn the volume up and no one has any idea what they're listening to. And quite often, particularly for people who listen to it loud, everyone can listen and they're really annoyed by it. So be careful, be considerate, keep the volume down on the phones. For rude train onboarding, disboarding, and boarding and disembarking behavior. Just that idea of basically just standing in the way of the doors, not being considerate to people trying to get on or get off, you know, take a step off the train, move to the side, stuff like that. 34%. Inappropriate seating behavior. They call this manspreading, but of course women do it too. Women also, you know, you get the thing when you get sometimes on the Ginza line, they put their bags on the seat. That's also considered to be bad form. So manspreading I don't think is a fair term, but certainly. Talking in loud voices. Are you hearing this? Particularly foreign people, this is what we often using the mobile phone or talking loudly. Again, you could argue, why do other people have to be up there? You know, why does this have to be treated as inconsiderate? It's just annoying, you know, not inconsiderate, but yeah, you get a dirty look, and this is why the trains are really quiet. And the biggest one is this one, the bag placement thing. If you're like a backpacker, and I've done this my first time I came to Tokyo, I had a huge backpack on my back, and I didn't know what else I could do. You know, my friend would shout to me, I'd turn around, and 3 people would fall over from my bag, knocking them over. The etiquette is, when you've got a big bag or a backpack or anything, when you're on the train, you sort of switch it on your arm so that it's like a baby, so that you're carrying it in front of your body, so at least you don't unknowingly knock people over or unknowingly block people trying to walk around you. Yeah, and the other thing is sometimes even when it's on the floor, people don't see or they don't expect bags to be on the floor, and they'll trip over them and so on, particularly when the trains are crowded. So yeah, be careful with your bag etiquette. Another thing that, particularly if you're traveling in Japan, you should be careful about. So yes, it's worldwide, and again, it's particularly in Japan though, just because the trains are so crowded, it's something you should pay attention to. This is an interesting story here. So this is from the South China Morning Post. It's not from a Japanese, and it's actually covered by the Agence France Presse. I can't pronounce that properly, but it's basically a story featuring a Japanese Swiss citizen who basically grew up in the Japanese mother and a Haitian father. Oh wait a minute, that's Naomi Osaka, so it's not her. Shiraishi. So Shiraishi was born and raised in Switzerland. Her parents working for the UN and United Nations High Commission, Commissioner for Refugees. Apparently her father is a Japanese lawyer, I believe. So she grew up with dual citizenship. Now, two things I took away from this article which are interesting. As you know, Japan has a law that doesn't recognize dual citizenship. I can't apply for a Japanese passport without having to give up my New Zealand passport, so you can't switch to become Japanese, but you can be born Japanese and have two passports. And although technically the law requires at the age of 22 that you choose one citizenship and you renounce other citizenships, the law's never been enforced. So it's on the books technically, but it's one of these things. Most half people just keep renewing both passports and keep using both. It's sort of a don't ask, don't tell kind of a policy but by the letter of the law, Japan doesn't recognize dual citizenship. This Japanese woman who was born in Switzerland and grew up in Switzerland was back in Japan. One moment, let me just quickly, I've got to blow my nose. Ooh. Sorry about that. So the father advised her to return her Japanese passport. For him, there was no question of me living hidden, residing against Japanese laws by holding two passports in secret. Now, in truth, and I think they point this out in the article either before or after this point, there are approximately 900,000 people in Japan. In practice, though, the Justice Ministry has never sent a demand for someone to choose their citizenship. It says it is aware of 900,000 people with dual nationality between 1985 and 2016, but the number could be larger or smaller. So basically, this woman suddenly finding out that she had to get rid of her Japanese citizenship and the inconvenience she found going back to Switzerland and then coming back to Japan as a foreigner, having to give up her kanji name on her identification in Japan and so on. She felt kind of traumatized by the whole experience. But as the Justice Ministry itself points out, sure, it knows that there's nearly 1 million people in Japan that have dual citizenship, and it doesn't really care. But yet her father said, no, you have to give it up, and basically ruined her life. So from this perspective, yes, you could say, on the one hand, if Japan knows and is okay with 1 million people having dual citizenship, why not just let them keep it? Why be dicks about it? But at the same time, why would a father march their daughter to the Ministry of Justice and forcing them to strip them of citizenship? Like, that seems a little bit messed up. From when I read this whole story about this very traumatized person and talking about how silly it is from the Japanese government, it does point out 50 countries, including most countries in Asia, still only have recognized single citizenship. Some countries in Europe as well. But in this whole story, it seems to me that the dad is a bit of a dickhead about this, actually, and is the one who's most responsible for the traumatization that took place. So there you go. The J-Log says that China just released an announcement that anyone with Chinese ancestry, no stipulation as to how far back, that is, you could prove it, you are encouraged to come home. What's interesting, the J-Vlog? Well, China's been in an interesting position, for example, where there were ethnic Chinese in Indonesia, for example, who during the 1950s and 60s were subject to, and actually again in the 90s, but in the 50s and 60s they were subject to genocide. And they actually boat lifted a lot of their just ethnic Chinese, some of whom had been living there for hundreds of years. But when there was genocide happening, they went and saved their people. Problem was, just after they brought them into China, the Cultural Revolution happened, and then they were actually forced as refugees to go back to Indonesia. Which shows the double-edged sword that is Chinese welcome. Yeah, it isn't clear, I guess, from that if they're talking about diaspora or children of Chinese. Certainly there are a lot of Chinese who do go overseas and have kids overseas to get their kids to avoid military service, and frankly just the whole human rights abuse of that country and not wanting to have their kids grow up in that country. So it's good that they're welcoming them back. But yeah, it's interesting that they're doing that. But again, China is another country that doesn't recognize multiple citizenships. And when Japanese talk about the issues of introducing recognition of multiple citizenship, it's China that's the main concern from a Japanese perspective. At least for people born in Japan, they're okay with them holding on, including Chinese, holding on to both their passports. But they don't like the idea of people coming to Japan and, for other purposes adopting multiple citizenships, to be able to vote or take advantage in Japan. So that's a paranoia that you hear about most often, rather than foreign. Well, they also talk about this with Koreans as well. But again, Most people, they don't seem to have a problem with foreigners born by birth. Just in this case, this rejected dual national. I read this story and I agree generally that making them choose at 22 technically is kind of dumb, but at the same time they don't actually make anyone do it. They let 1 million people knowingly get away with it, and in this case it was just the dad, so I feel bad about that. This is kind of good news. You might have noticed if you have a Japanese driver's license that whenever you're asked to show, whenever you're traveling overseas and they say where's your driver's license, it's pretty common. Like if you've got a California driver's license but you're in New York, you can still show your California license or your Canadian license or whatever. Most driver's licenses generally look about the same, and you can use them for ID. The problem with the Japanese driver's license is that they use the until now they've always used the imperial calendar, so you can't even tell what year it's talking about in terms of the validity date. From next year they are going to be switching this to have the at least the expiry date on the license in Western calendar. So that's kind of one improvement, which is kind of nice. So the next one, a bit of a drama this week. Maybe you guys have seen. So again, the old South Korea Japan thing. It does feel very much like Monty Python-ish. I think you're all forgetting who the real enemy is. So having just completed the last round of preparations for Japanese invasion of Takeshima a few weeks ago, just basically trolling and winding Japan up just like Korea likes to do, an incident happened, the first time ever actually. So this has happened with Chinese aircraft and ships have missile radar locked on Japanese self-defense force vehicles before. However, a South Korean military vessel has never missile locked on Japanese craft before, but on the weekend we had for the first time ever apparently a Korean Navy ship actually locked on to a Japanese surveillance plane which was flying in Japanese airspace, and it actually missile locked on this airplane for a number of minutes multiple times. And the Japanese military and the foreign ministry immediately protested to South Korea, and they said, listen, this friendly countries don't do this. What are you talking about? The Japanese military said it was shocked because whatever the political relations, actually the Japanese self-defense forces have a good relationship with the South Koreans, with the South Korean military, so they were surprised that the South Korean military would missile lock on one of its planes, and they're like, what's happening? The South Koreans came out with an explanation a few days later. Bear in mind, there was an incident like this earlier this year where an actual South Korean naval vessel, or it was a Coast Guard vessel, actually attempted to board and remove Japanese fishing boats from within the Japanese economic zone, and this wasn't around Takeshima or anything like that. And again, that was kind of later claimed that, oh, they were just confused as to their location. But now we have this case where they locked onto a Japanese self-defense forces plane. They came up with an explanation that they were tracking a North Korean boat at the time, and that the radar accidentally locked on the plane. Sorry about that. We didn't intentionally missile lock on the plane. However, the self-defense forces looked at what happened, looked at the incident again, and they're like, no, you don't accidentally, when you're tracking a boat, you don't accidentally missile lock on a plane for multiple minutes. They knew what they were locking onto, and their story is BS. Basically, it's lies. It was a deliberate act by the people on that boat. It wasn't an accidental act. And again, the Japanese government's gone back and is saying to the South Koreans, what the hell, guys, please, and you've got to come up with a better explanation than that, not let this happen again. So now it's back with the South Koreans that are like, well, we don't want to talk about it. But I don't know, either the South Korean military are like completely incompetent, which I don't believe. I mean, they're world-class military over there. But either their navy is just really sucks, like they don't know where they are and they can't tell the difference between a plane and a boat, or they've got some real dickheads in it, just or they're trolling on purpose, or who knows. But it is kind of weird anyway from this perspective that that these sort of things are happening, and right now the Japanese government is upset and they're making a big noise about it, and a lot of other things right now. As usual, of course, they never seem to be able to get along, but what can you do? More Gon news. I guess you've probably heard by now that Gon was set free, and then he was arrested again. So this might have come out a little bit like I think I mentioned before how when they arrested Shoko Asahara and the Yamshinikyo cult after the subway gassings, what the police like to do in Japan is they like to get a long shopping list of crimes that they can charge them with. And they detain them on one charge at a time. The idea is they want to prolong the detention for as long as possible, basically to get them out of the picture while they're investigating, to try to get a confession, try to minimize their own work. And although most Western countries do not consider confessions given after more than 72 hours of detention to be valid, in Japan, 10 days is the minimum detention, and you're not subject to, your interrogator is responsible for your welfare, you don't have access to your lawyer. So from a human rights perspective, Japan is actually, when you're in police detention, it's not good. Like, you don't want to get in that situation. It's frankly, as someone who works in law in Japan, it's embarrassing. It's actually shameful, and it's contrary to basic human rights standards, the way the Japanese treats normal Japanese criminals. Now, this isn't a normal Japanese criminal. This is a rich multi-millionaire head of a company. And it's kind of not fair in a way that we're only drawing attention to these issues because it happens to be a famous rich white guy, Lebanese of course, but given that he's head of like a big French company, he kind of gets he gets the added credit of that. At the same time, they hold him basically for 20 days, and they tried to extend for 30 days on the idea that he had not reported compensation that they were planning to pay him after such time as he ever decided to retire. And they basically have rejected that. They've argued back the whole time, hey, listen, company presidents take a salary after they quit as like an advisor to the company, and they get a salary from that all the time. This was totally, this was all signed off by the lawyers, by the corporate governance. This wasn't done in secret. There was no fixed plan for this. You got nothing. And they got an extension from 10 to 20 days. When they tried to extend to 30 days, the Tokyo District Court said, you know what, no, you don't have any evidence. They're not admitting it. So we're going to give bail to the people. We're going to let them out. So it looked like it was over. But as soon as they let him out, they pulled them back in again. They went to crime number 2 on the list, which was breach of fiduciary trust, which is the idea that company presidents are not supposed to abuse their own position as head of the company for personal gain. And they are claiming now that 10 years ago, when he had some stock trading losses, personal financial losses, he topped himself up using Nissan funds. Again, he's disputing the facts of that. So again, we're going into another situation that's another disputed crime. Plus, there's another issue in Japan that for claims like this, there's a statute of limitations of 7 years, and the prosecutors are claiming this thing, which is, by the way, stealing from a company to cover your basically losing money on the horses. I mean, it's trading losses. That is a serious crime, actually, and it's more serious than the deferred income thing, and it does reflect, and they point out that this highlights their view that this person's an unethical person. There is that aspect to it, but this is outside of the statute of limitations. But the point is that they've now brought up a different charge. So just as they were going to let him out, they arrested him again, and now he's back in for another initial 10-day period. So he's not going to be out at least until January 10, and they're probably going to extend it again then as well. And yeah, just like with Yamshinikyo, how the first thing that they charged them with, I mean, these people kidnapped people, they murdered people, they nerve gassed the subway. The first thing that they arrested Shoko Asahara for, the first thing that they held him for, was possession of a sword, a blade longer than 15 centimeters, which was a paper cutter guillotine that they found in the facility where they arrested him from. They held him for that first while they gathered evidence of the other crimes, basically to prolong the detention as long as possible. So the point is, Gon's going to be detained for at least 30 days, and obviously 40 days, 50 days probably, and it seems that he's not being cooperative, he's not going to confess. But the prosecutors are just going to probably string this along and keep just adding on whatever random charges they can do to just hold them for as long as possible, which is frankly just not a good way of doing things, if you ask me. But yeah, I see 2 comments there from the J-Vlog. We've got J-Vlog, the thing there about encouraging people to come home. Quint Rankett, you hear that the US is selling a huge amount of fighter planes to Japan. Yes, indeed, Japan's buying a lot of the F-35s. Japan is in turn converting their helicarrier to launch those fighters. That's right, I talked about this last week as well, actually. That is correct. The Izumo, I can't believe it's not an aircraft carrier, a helicopter carrier called the Izumo that Japan has that looks exactly like an aircraft carrier, will have vertical takeoff and landing F-35s. They're not specially modified. There are 3 versions of the F-35. Some which take off on runway, some which can take off vertically, and this is the marine version that can take off and land vertically. Japan's buying a whole stack of them, and it's going to make some minor modifications to the Izumo to basically turn it into what can become a fully functional aircraft carrier. Which, yeah, that was confirmed last week. So that is correct. Couldn't rank it. So yes, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy and whatever on this, but at the same time, the guy's getting a lot of money and whatever, and certainly if it turns out that he was reimbursing his training losses out of the coffers of Nissan, that is a bad look. Even though there are some fundamental issues with the claim being made. So the point is that even though it surprised everybody, it looked like, oh, he's going to get out. Actually, even people have said this whole deferred income thing is basically, doesn't look like it's based on fact. It turns out that after all, he is going back in because they're just going to keep adding charges one by one every time that they let him out. So that's going to keep playing on. We'll see how that looks in the new year, but certainly this is going to be a big thing that's going to continue probably through 2019. We'll keep all of you guys updated on that. So I just noticed the comment there by Lysander45. So yes, we've got this is kind of cool. This is actually not a photo taken like that. This is a composite of multiple photos, but this is a crater that the European Space Agency has taken a photo of, and it's got like a kilometer deep water ice on Mars. So if people want to go and work and live on Mars, there is a crater there, 82 kilometers across, with full of water, basically like an ocean that people will be able to use for water there. So that's pretty cool. So I thought that was something worth sharing. Oh yeah, so this is another big one. So we should talk about this. So Japan pretty much has decided it is leaving the IWC, the International Whaling Commission. And I guess this was coming for a long time, but it looks like they're finally doing it. A lot to break apart from this in a way. I haven't really talked much about the whaling issue here. I know it's very people who generally have very strong opinions on it. My general opinion here, in terms of the ethical debate around this, you only really have standing against this if you are vegan. And I'm not saying that to limit things at all. Sea Shepherd only allows vegans to actually go on its boats, that go on the protest trips to the South Ocean. So they sort of acknowledge this themselves. They don't want to be inconsistent about distinguishing between different types of animals. But again, let's go back into the story of what the IWC is and how we sort of got where we are. So basically, and one minute, I'm sorry, I haven't really talked that much today, but I'm realizing as I'm talking now I'm a little bit blocked up, so just one moment. Oof, I've got to get down to Australia. So basically, I think we know the general story, which is that, certainly up until the 1950s, in the 19th century, whaling was an industrial thing. We didn't have oil from Saudi Arabia, or whatever. Oil wasn't, of course, we didn't have gasoline-powered engines. So oil was mainly for things like lighting and so on. And oil came as much out of these things, out of whales, as anything else. People hadn't really figured out a good way to get it out of the ground, per se. And whaling was basically for the fat and for the oil of these things, and it was industrial scale, and it was done by the European nations, by New Zealand, by Australia, by America. And as the techniques for how to whale improved, they were pretty successful right through up to the 1950s and 60s, and basically almost exterminating every species of whale in the world. Basically the bigger they were, the more endangered they became. Japan, although had a limited history of coastal whaling around Japan, some villages and communities would eat porpoises, they would eat dolphins, and they would eat coastal whales, including minke whales that go around Japan. Japan also, as it modernized, got into the industrial whaling that Western nations also participated in, perhaps with the distinction that they were, although whale was also certainly eaten, in Western countries as well as Japan, but certainly in Japan there was a thing. It's not so much that whale was a significant part of the menu traditionally in Japan, but pre-war and during the war, where there were like protein shortages, it was hard to get farm animals in Japan. When they had basically famines and food shortages and whatever, whale was basically a cheap source of meat, which the government was capturing lots of anyway. So it was pretty common during the war and before the war for people in Japan to eat whale meat, which Japanese would, whereas Western countries would typically hunt whales and just dispose of the carcasses after they got the oil and so on out of them. Japanese would actually eat the meat as well, and although some people now claim that they're fond memories, but certainly people who were alive during the war, most people would have routinely eaten. And by the way, this was also during the war. It was pretty common in Western countries also to eat whale meat, where agriculture and distribution was more limited. But the end result of this was that certainly by the 60s and 70s it was recognized that most whales were nearly gone, and the most whaling industries were struggling with the fact that, apart from the two issues, that one, they weren't able to find whales to catch anymore, which was endangering their business, and the fact that, from the environmental concern, that these animals were disappearing. So basically all of the industrial whaling nations got together in the 80s, and they agreed, they'd already formed the International Whaling Commission before this, the global body that maintains global whaling. But they recognized that they had managed the resource poorly, and they decided in the 1980s to have a moratorium, that they were going to stop whaling in order to allow whale stocks to replenish, as a way to protect their industry, in order to allow whaling to continue. What happened after the moratorium, however, was that most Western whaling nations decided that there wasn't really much of a need for it anymore. All of the oil needs that people had for whales in the West were met through other means, through petroleum. They didn't really eat the meat very much. So really the only countries that were really seriously interested in actually resuming whaling when it became possible, or never stopping, were the countries that ate whale meat, which were Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and Japan, basically for industrial countries. And obviously some people are traditional, whale farming, like in, for example, whale harvesting, like in Alaska and so on as well. But basically the objective of the moratorium was to allow whale stocks to recover in order for whaling, commercial whaling, to eventually resume. And the idea being that there could be scientific whaling while this was happening, basically as a means of capturing and studying whale stocks to verify whether they're recovering or not. The only country which actually actively exercised its right to scientific whaling during the moratorium was Japan. There's been debate, obviously, about whether it was sincerely done for scientific research, but the Japanese sort of used that loophole, and they claim to have been collecting data and to be validating, and then through the scientific whaling they claim to have validated that some stocks indeed remain endangered and some appear to have recovered. We've gotten to a point where, certainly by the time we got to the 90s, there were certain types of whales, like minke whales, smaller whales, which were already not endangered. And it was arguable that they never really were endangered. They weren't really actively targeted or hunted. They were smaller, and it was pretty much recognized very quickly that there was no real reason that these whales couldn't be commercially hunted. And also these are the whales that are found close to Japan anyway, where the commercial catch would most often be. However, what did happen was, as soon as the moratorium came in, most countries like New Zealand and Australia and Canada and America decided, rather than have these whaling fleets pull up and pay them subsidies to do nothing until the whale stocks recovered, it didn't make sense to sustain these industries when these whalers who had nothing to do anymore. So basically they paid them some subsidies, but basically they encouraged them quickly to retool and do fishing or go into other industries, and they allowed the whaling industries to die. And part of the reason they did this was they didn't see the point in paying people to sustain an industry while there was a moratorium. And the other thing was just generally there was also a growing environmental movement in these countries, which also thought, well, these animals are endangered and it's not necessary to kill them. So there was a shift from the idea that it was okay to whale to the idea that it was not okay to whale. And in the midst of that, particularly in New Zealand, there became kind of this mystique or aura develop around whales, the idea that not only Was it not a good idea to have a whaling industry, and that it was good to stop, but actually that these animals were like special animals, like they're actually super intelligent, maybe more intelligent than us, maybe connected to aliens, maybe they are aliens. I used to have a piano teacher in Auckland who was a member of Greenpeace. New Zealand has one of the highest Greenpeace memberships in the world. House covered in crystals and posters and so on, and people who genuinely believe that that whales are large brain spiritual animals and so on, and at least equivalent to humans, and should actually be treated differently to other animals and not be seen as being like big cows in the ocean or other forms of which is a little bit strange to me, because again, you get into the idea, if you start trying to separate them by intelligence, we know, for example, pigs are super intelligent. Smaller whales have brain sizes and physical characteristics that are very, very close to cows. So again, I think if you're not vegan, if you are eating meat, but somehow deciding that that whale meat is like special, or whales are special, you're getting into a little bit of a shaky area. But certainly, I think there was a very thing when I was in school during the 80s, just when the moratorium was in place in New Zealand. I think it was pretty hard-held morality, the sense that eating whales was wrong, and that the countries that did it were wrong and had to stop. And this is something that I think most people in New Zealand and Australia, and probably in Canada and England and so on, and America also think that eating whales are wrong. And although Iceland and Norway and some other countries, Scandinavian countries, also do this, it is interesting that the focus on this really came on Japan more than anyone else, and it was really coming back to the old stereotypes of Japan being this sort of brutal, soulless kind of industrial country doing these horrible things to these animals, just cruelty sort of stuff. A lot of the war themes, the idea of it being cruel and heartless and soulless and so on. Actually, a lot of racist stereotypes that were really still alive in the post-war period were applied to the idea of the Japanese practice of industrial whaling and scientific whaling. And really, they'd only criticise the Norwegians and the Icelandic as an afterthought, perhaps because of the proximity and the size of the Japanese economy. But whatever the point, Japan stayed in the IWC basically on the premise that Japan, rather than allowing its whaling fleet to disappear like they did with other countries, did decide to sustain its whaling fleet. The government subsidized it continuing to exist and the scientific hunts, and they stayed in the game hoping that whaling would resume at some point when the numbers supported it. And in good faith, they would say, they remained, they held on the moratorium, they supported it, the extension of it, even when it became reasonable to catch, when manageable, treating whales as a resource, which is what the IWC was originally for. When it became reasonable to allow catches of certain whales, they wanted to resume. But the problem is that countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, which were original founding whaling nations, now wanted it to make the IWC a conservation organization. They were concerned actually with a universal ban on whaling, kind of contrary to the original purpose of the IWC. And it became this weird sort of global diplomatic arm wrestle between countries that actually wanted to go back to whaling when it became possible, to countries that wanted to stop whaling forever. Coming from New Zealand, it's kind of funny. People in New Zealand are not very religious anymore, but we have a history of coming into a country where the people there did not have Christianity and they didn't have our civilization and our values, and we felt sorry for them, and we felt that we had to sort of save them from the wrongness of their own culture and their own religion. And with the best of intentions in New Zealand and Australia, we destroyed the cultures and in many cases the people themselves. But certainly we came in and we saw everything that they did that was different, in terms of what they ate, in terms of what they believed and worshipped. And we believed with absolute sincerity. We look back at the way that our colonial history and we think, well, our great-grandparents must have been very embarrassing, horrible, racist people. Thank heavens we're more enlightened now. But truth is, they were nice people. They were just the same as us, and they had these very sincerely held views that they were showing these people how to live properly like civilized people. And I think, although now the frame of religion is gone, I think we still have that view. When we think something's right, we don't have the perspective to see it as being cultural. I think it's a thing about Protestantism and, you know, sort of Western countries in particular. We generally have a view of the world that's very simplistic, which is, you know, our view is right and everyone else is absolutely wrong, and there's no gray on this, and there's basically complete incapability to acknowledge that the idea that whales can be seen by some people as another animal and a type of food. It's seen as being like murdering people, and people will say it in those terms. They'll actually personify. They'll go to McDonald's, they'll eat meat, and yet they'll still say, no, whales are different. Whales are special. I believe that whales are, you know, super intelligent. They need protection, and killing a whale is like killing a person. I've had this conversation multiple times with people, and when they say that, it's a bit like talking to, you know, sort of anti-abortionists or whatever as well. Once you frame it as a murder of a person, it just becomes an absolute, you know, there's no room for discussion. And that is where New Zealand is. They're treating this basically like anti-abortionists treat abortion, which makes them particularly virulently against it. And at the same time, you might argue from a Japanese perspective, you know, why do we have to bend to the will of hysterical, you know, basically neo-colonial white people thinking that they're right and telling us what to do, you know, when that's up to us. And then they don't want to bend to that, and there's kind of a nationalist cause which is built up around the idea that, frankly, this is just a bunch of, you know, white people first world bullshit, which has kind of driven the right-wing opposition to this whole, you know, to the idea of the counter against the anti-whaling movement in Japan. From my perspective, look, I'm not anti-whaling, I'm not. But at the same time, I still think it's not really in Japan's overall best interest that it's picking a pitched battle over this. There are only 2 towns in Japan really that whale, Taiji in Wakayama and I think Katsura in Chiba, that have whaling fleets that have I guarantee you that the people who, the average age of these whalers, one, there are a number of probably less than a couple of hundred people that actually go on these boats. They're elderly. Japan has a problem of a declining aging population. Of all the industries that are dying for lack of sufficient people to go into jobs, why is the government investing all this money and spending all of this political capital and goodwill with its allies in order to protect an industry that should have died 20 years ago, frankly? People don't eat whale normally. I mean, it's available. The government itself, actually, local school boards, will get the scientifically caught whale meat, which is brought back, it is butchered, and it's distributed. Again, it's in the rules of the IWC that you're not allowed to throw away carcasses. You can't just toss them over the side of the boat when you're done, you know, dissecting them. You're required to consume them. So they bring it back to Japan, they distribute it, and it ends up in school lunches. Most people I know who have eaten whale will say they've only had it once or twice in their lives, but when they had it, it was normally at school. The education ministries tried to indoctrinate people that this is normal to sort of bolster their arguments with the rest of the world, and I kind of get why they want to do it, because frankly, I know it sounds like a bit of like the Chinese foreign ministry saying this is just white neo-colonialism, but it actually is, and I kind of get wanting to fight back against that, but at the same time, this is the wrong battle for Japan. I mean, you know, whale meat is just I've had a deep fried whale meat cutlet once. People talk about the safety issue. Well, so 2 things that are going to happen now that Japan is looking at dropping out of the IWC. First thing is, it's not going to go down to the Southern Ocean anymore. Where for the scientific whaling, it's going to stop doing that. The commercial catch should only be around the oceans around Japan, and it should only be for non-endangered whales now. The scientific whaling was actually allowed them to go and get endangered whales. This should just be minkies, and it should be just near Japan. So in a way, it means that the hopes of having the Southern Ocean, you know, sanctuary and all that sort of stuff actually will get bolstered, and certainly probably fewer whales are going to get killed as a result of this, actually. But in terms of the meat, some people pointed out, well, what about the safety of the meat? Well, from my perspective, if meat has mercury in it, or fish has mercury in it, it is subject to food safety standards, and I'm hoping that if they do sell it, that it'll be subject to that. But look, the fact is nobody eats it, and there is no market for it, and there's no need to build up a market for it artificially. So I don't know. I think this is an industry which I think without government support would have long died ago, and probably even with a return to commercial whaling isn't going to survive. So there you go. I just think that although this is happening, and although I can sort of see it from both sides, and I indeed grew up with the idea that eating whales was disgusting. I also thought that eating horses was disgusting. I also thought that eating sea urchin was disgusting. I also thought that eating eggplant was disgusting. I also thought that eating zucchini was disgusting. And all of these things were wrong and crimes against humanity. I now love eggplant and sea urchin and zucchini, and I could care less about, again, a non-endangered animal species like whales. I've eaten horse. I still have the association, but the thing about horse meat is I associate it with dog food. But of course it's eaten in Spain, it's eaten in Japan, it's eaten in other countries. It's cultural. The point is I can recognize it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to enjoy it, but I can recognize that my own disgust is not a natural human reaction, it's my cultural reaction. I can recognize that because I've been in a place where I can see that not everybody reacts the same as me. The problem is that in Australia and New Zealand, people don't have that perspective. They can't understand that their feelings are their culture rather than some absolute, God-given truth. And again, it's the same kind of, it's like a missionary, evangelical kind of zeal, and it's really annoying. But this is frankly how the British Empire was made. It was through a lot of well-intentioned people desperate to go out and tell the world how wrong their cultures are. And it was very successful for the British. I'm a product of that. That's my cultural heritage. I find it slightly embarrassing. I understand it. I actually don't think that we were as evil as we appear to be to all the people that we colonized. I actually think that probably my grandfather and my great-grandfathers were probably a lot like me. And they probably did everything with the very best intentions, but not realizing at times that they were doing very, very wrong things. And I think that's a little bit what this is. But at the same time, for Japan, I mean, really, is this where they have to, die in a ditch over this fight? There's just no value to it. No one wants the meat. The industry is dying anyway. It's just a pure, national grandstanding, and no one really cares about it, even if they feel like they've got the moral high ground on it. So interesting. Anyway, Lysander 45 also with Australia again. I mean, you talk about the idea of the whaling by Australia and New Zealand often wasn't for the meat, it was just for the oil. They'd toss the carcasses away. They cull animals, kangaroos all the time, and they don't eat the meat. They don't, they'll sometimes use the pelts. I've been out hunting possums. You don't eat possum, it's disgusting. We ate the rabbits. But Japanese, at least they use the stuff. It causes me to see both sides of the cultural equation on it anyway. And on this, although I think that my own country is acting a little bit hysterical about it, at the same time, I don't think Japan needs to do this. So yeah, and eventually I think our whole species probably, hell, maybe even within my lifetime, will really go to a point where we'll look at all meat eating as being like this. And you know what, maybe that's where it's supposed to go, and I'll agree with that. I think that actually the vegans are the only people who are right on this. So yeah, I found a cool site with rated movies, including for Japan region. So if you've got Netflix in Japan, it's got the top rated movies that are available on Netflix. It doesn't have for Japan region for Amazon, on the US, but hopefully it'll get that for that as well, and that's helped me find a lot of stuff to download for the flight to Australia. Collis has just launched its 2019 358 different fonts that work with Japanese. This site is awesome. Every year I share this site, and you should go have a look at this if you use Japanese fonts. These are fonts that work with kanji, and they just look really, 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 some of them look stupid and some of them look cool, but there are 358 of them. So if you ever type in Japanese and you want free fonts, you got to look at this. This is just an incredible bunch of fonts. Anyway, so go check that out. Collis's latest collection. Boom, boom. How do I get out of here? There we go. I realize I'm already over time, but hell, it's the last show of the year, so I'll keep going. We have butter cloning. Yes, indeed, I want butter cloning. Quickly. Yes, Mr. Quaddy Chip, I lied. I lied about going through the topics quickly. Yeah, you know that I do this. What can I do? Epic Games. Fortnite is getting sued over dance moves. Now again, I'm a lawyer by trade, by profession, and I think this is a bunch of bullshit. the are we going to get sued by who invented the freaking foxtrot? I mean, are we going to put copyrights and own royalties every time? I mean, you know, somebody does a dance move. Is, you know, Michael Jackson's estate going to come back and claim from, you know, every white 8-year-old who tried to, you know, copy the moonwalk? I mean, hell, when was that? It was like 1982. I was like 6 years old. Are we all going to get sued for learning how to like do dance moves now? Are you kidding me? I mean, I think that's I don't know. As a lawyer, here's the thing about the law. People think that the law is like a bunch of rules that you get that lawyers like memorize, and they can like pull. It's like a bag of tricks that they can use to get you off stuff. I realize that that's how a lot of people think lawyers are. When you're a lawyer, when you work in a law firm, knowledge is a big part of it, but at the same time, what it comes down to is law is codified common sense. It's basically the idea of if you hear something, someone wants to propose something to you that doesn't sound like it, it sounds screwy. Generally speaking, a judge is going to, if it sounds screwy to the judge, they'll just come up with a good objective reason for it. There's always, with something like this, there's always reasons for and against. There's arguments that you can do both ways, and someone's got to sit in the middle and decide, well, what's reasonable given today's society. But the idea that, and I realize that nowadays, you know, you have industries that will go around and, you know, charge restaurants if they're playing music on the radio, make them pay royalties and stuff like that. We've kind of lost our minds on a lot of areas of intellectual property. But I think seriously, if we are going to go around and have royalty collecting organizations going around, you know, charging people for dancing, hell, this will be like better than Footloose. This will actually be more successful. People are not going to be allowed to like dance. Quint Rankit, yeah, that's what it is. Whenever I get a legal problem, I'm trying to think through what's the rationale, what's the best rule, what's all, not just the best rule, think about how it should be, and then you find the rule to sort of go with what the most reasonable, supports the most reasonable interpretation. And what lawyers at law firms do is we don't go looking through books looking for, you know, loopholes or whatever. We go around and we pretty much go through, does this sound reasonable? Does that sound fair? What's the fairest way to put this? What's the most reasonable argument for this? What's the most reasonable thing for this? What's the most reasonable thing against it? How do I weigh those two things up? And any issue that I get, you have 5 conversations with people who for a living do nothing except try to think, what's a common sense? What's the most reasonable way to deal with this? I know that's not how most people think of lawyers, but that's how I see the job myself, and that's what I do. And when I see something like this, while I can see the arguments for it, I can see the rationale that when Carlton sees, you know, someone kept copying his dance moves and making money from it, that he feels it's unfair that he doesn't get a cut of that. I get that. But big society picture, if you allow Carlton to go and collect revenue from when he sees someone else doing his moves, yeah, the risk is that we're all going to start getting charged every time we start dancing. I mean, that's just stupid. Quint Rankit. I've done American law since 2006, 12 years, and all the lawyers that I know and work with that are not Japanese are all American. There are good lawyers and bad lawyers, I'll admit, but bad lawyers generally look at the law as a bag of tricks. Good lawyers are always thinking in terms of what's reasonable, and I'm lucky I know a lot of good lawyers, so yeah. This is kind of funny. Putin has declared the Ainu one of the recognized indigenous groups to Russia, which is kind of funny. Japan has never actually recognized Okinawans or Ainu or any other ethnic group within Japan as being separate or different to all Japanese. So Japan's got this idea that, you know, all people are equal Japanese under the civil code and under the law, and they're not separate. So although Ainu exist, they're not formally recognized anywhere in Japan. Russia has recognized them now. Ainu are indigenous to parts of the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is that bit of land where sticks out pointing towards Hokkaido, and they're also indigenous to the islands which are occupied by Russia and claimed by Japan. So it's an interesting move by Putin to actually recognize the Ainu. It could be seen as bolstering the idea that as the Ainu are indigenous Russian peoples, that those islands are part of Russia as well as the Ainu people. On the other, it also makes Japan look kind of bad because it's a recognition that they've given of the Ainu people in Russia that Japan hasn't. So I thought that was kind of an interesting move. Japan, among the G7 nations since 1970, this year again, once again, has the lowest productivity among those among the G7. I could talk about this for a long time as well. I think Japan doesn't value productivity in the same way that America does, and I think that there's obvious positives and negatives to that. If you look at productivity as a be-all and end-all, seeing how much work you can get out of people for the lowest cost and the greatest efficiency, that doesn't necessarily equate to like the best thing always. I think the things that define Japan for me are the good service, the high quality, I think when you think of airlines, for example, they seem to be finding ways on US airlines to put you into smaller seats, with crappier staff that are lower paid, with people who will toss your suitcase. Basically, it becomes like trying to push you towards not so much the best customer experience as to the cheapest customer experience that the company can get away with, and that's productivity. I think providing you with a better experience, like with a nice comfy seat and good service and whatever, even if it's not the most efficient thing. I mean, again, I'm talking about ideals. Of course, there's a lot of waste in Japan's economy, but the point that I'm saying is things like the way that Japan's silicon wafers came about, the way that it became better at chip making than America, was born out of the fact that it wasn't trying to be productive. It was born out of artisanship. It was born out of trying to make better quality wafers with less, with less waste, with less, fails on the quality checking. Which, in the end of the day, the Japanese got so good at making high quality chips with low defect rates that it just became that they were saving more of these chips. America was tossing 90% of chips through the review process in the 70s, through the quality checking process, and it just made them cheaper in Japan because they just got better at making them. But it was an unintended consequence of the idea that they just had a less efficient process to begin with. That's a rare case where it turned out to be a benefit. And certainly you come in Japan, you'll see a lot of people doing jobs where they obviously don't need to be doing jobs. But then you ask, if these people weren't doing these jobs, what would the society be? What would the unemployment be? So you have all of that. But what it all adds up to, and it's all very mysterious to the Japanese government, is this idea that how can we be the least productive of the G7 nations? There must be something wrong with the way that they're collecting the data. No, this makes total sense. Japanese, in my experience of working in Japanese offices for 20 years, I don't think productivity is anywhere near the highest priority for most Japanese companies. So there you go. Hey, Okaro, it's good to see you. What else we got here? I'm almost done here. 40% of people don't want to participate in Bonenkai. These are cool. This was in Cornwall, I think. In UK, they found these dinosaur footprints where you can still see the skin and the scales and the claws on these footprints. Oh, that's pretty crazy, actually. Oh, these dinosaur footprints. So this is a bit like that thing that they found in Canada, during 2018. Another awesome thing from 2018, where they found that basically the whole Ankylosaurus type thing with still the scales and everything on it. And this is similar. So that's pretty cool, and so I just wanted to share that. Japan 110th in the world for global gender equality. Japan's got this employment shortage and all of these other problems, and yet they're still not addressing these other problems which could help to address that. So there you go with that. This is a good article on the fall of Gon, but not necessarily there. Here's the thing again about Japan 110th in the world on gender equality. So they made a big song and dance supposedly about trying to make Japanese society better for women to excel in and become company presidents and politicians and so on. But it clearly still is a long way away from that. And again, if you don't have that addressed, even with a country with a declining population and a declining workforce, you're going to have trouble retaining. This is why so many Japanese women leave the country to go to work overseas and live overseas. And clearly those issues are not being addressed. In Tokyo Station, the idea of having in everywhere except for Osaka, pretty much in Japan, people stand on the left-hand side of the escalators and they use the right as like a passing lane, same as on the roads. However, in Tokyo Station, there are cases where this causes people bumping and having accidents and falling over and getting into fights. And so the Japan Rail is trying to make it so that now they're asking people, they have people now in the station saying, please stand on both sides, don't walk through, don't allow people to walk through, because it's basically people rushing and trying to run on the stairs and so on the escalators that's causing a lot of these things, and they're trying to stop that as dangerous behavior. this is really interesting. So AI sound, like Vocaloid technology, is rapidly getting towards a point where it's getting difficult to distinguish from human artists. And check these out. These are 3 photos of people that were made entirely by AI. These people do not exist. And I tell you, I've seen some computer generated images of like random people, but that's pretty cool, right? So the acceleration towards, you know, like real AI, like where you'll be able to actually, we already get it in a way with music, for example. I think is a great example where you can already recreate digital instruments, drums, music. You can make it sound convincingly like you've got a whole orchestra if you want to, or, you know, a live band or whatever, and do it all with your laptop or your iPhone even. We're not quite there with things like with vocals yet, or things like creating images, but just for an idea of how close we are to be able to create things that we don't associate with being able to do with AI, it's pretty close. And certainly I think in the next couple of years we're going to be to a point where we'll be able to use our iPhones probably to create images of random people, like for ads. Probably even make them talk, have them do vlogs and stuff like that for your podcast where you don't want to show your face or something. And it's going to be really hard to tell the difference, just the same way as it's difficult to tell the difference between a true live drum or a digital drum. It's probably going to become like that with people and with images and so on, and with singing. So that's pretty interesting. I think this is the second to last one that we've got. Early on this week, you might have heard about this gas explosion at a Upperman shop. Earlier in the guy with glasses, wait a minute, there isn't a guy with glasses there, it must be something else. Oh, this guy, yeah. Not that advanced yet. So there was a real estate, so basically there was a restaurant and a real estate shop that just exploded all of a sudden. 42 people injured in Sapporo, and everyone thought, oh god, this must be another gas accident at a restaurant. This happens sometimes, particularly in Hokkaido during winter where they have to use a lot of gas. What it turned out was happened instead was there was a real estate shop which apparently when you go to rent a new apartment from Upper Mansion, a nationwide chain of apartment leases, you can pay $200, a nimayen extra, and they will go and they'll do an extra special clean of the apartment before you come in to make it sort of spotless and disinfected. Apparently what was happening with that was all that they were doing was taking something like a $2 or $3 can, like a Nihakuyen can of a deodorizer, and they were just spraying the apartments with this deodorizer spray, this disinfectant deodorizer spray. That's all that they were doing. They were not doing anything else other than their normal preparation, but they were basically getting away with charging $200 for a service where they would take a $2 can of spray and spray it in the apartment. However, in Hokkaido, where it's pretty cold now and already winter, what was happening was these guys were pocketing the nimayen, and they weren't even going and spraying the apartments. But in order to not get caught for not even spraying the places, 2 employees at the Sappaman place in Sapporo decided they would get rid of all the spray, all the deodorizers in the container in the office at night. So they basically let out the gas of something like 120 cans within a couple of hours. Then they decided that they would go and wash up, and when they pressed the gas, the gas water heating, it ignited all the gas from the 120 cans that they had just let out to make it look like they had done their work in spraying these apartments, which in itself, so it was like they were scamming on top of a scam. And it triggered an explosion which destroyed an entire city block. Basically, it destroyed the real estate shop and the restaurant next door and injured 42 people. The fact that Upperman was getting away with this in the first place, it came out what they were doing, that they were only spraying these places and not doing anything else and ripping people off on the service. But these people were not even doing that, and they were trying to hide not even doing that. They were letting all the gas out in the real estate place, and then they blew up the real estate office and the restaurant next door when that happened. I mean, it's a lot of stupid to happen, and unfortunately, 42 people. I mean, some people got like serious. Nobody died, thank heavens, but some people got really seriously injured. So that wasn't good. Record number of visitors came last year, and record number expected for next year. Okay, that took a long time. For 2019, I don't know about you guys, I'm looking forward to what am I looking forward to? I just think it's been like awesome for tech. It's been awesome seeing how like things are sort of just advancing in terms of, yeah, I think the world is actually overall getting better in spite of all the weird politics and stuff like that. TPP is coming into force in a few days in Japan on December 30, which means that we're going to get cheaper meat and not cheaper butter, unfortunately, but we're going to have basically generally free trade with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, most countries in Southeast Asia. That's going to be awesome. And then from February, Japan also has a free trade agreement with the EU coming up. So basically free trade with everybody in Europe except for Britain, who I guess are on their way out. So basically Japan is going to have like food and products basically trade with those countries is going to become a lot cheaper from a Japan perspective. So for the EU and pretty much everywhere around the Pacific except for America and China is going to be subject to these really awesome trade deals. So I am looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm enjoying YouTube Premium and I'm enjoying using it with my Gen TV, which I'm going to keep pushing ahead next year. Would I handle that loss? I certainly wouldn't want to defend it. I mean, no, if I was Upperman, I'd say they've got to pay. I mean, they'll have to pay, and for all the people who come and say, yeah, about that $200 I paid you just, and all you did was spray a can, can I get my money back? Yes, if I were the lawyer, I would say the sniff test on this is, yeah, you got to pay that money back. You're going to lose. That's what I would say. Yeah, you'd be pretty strong unless they knew what they were getting. But I don't think anyone would accept that if they understood that. So yeah. Whoa, it's late there in Sydney, indeed. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to do a bit of a musical outro. I'm going to see you guys all next year. It's gone a long show tonight. I said I had a lot of topics. I was going to try to get through it quicker, but I hope that you all have a fantastic end of year. Happy holidays, whatever holidays those are for you, and whatever part of the world that you're in. I'm working on Christmas Day this year, which sucks, but then I'm going to Australia on the 26th, and I'll be down there for a wee while in Brisbane. I'll be with the fam, so I'm not planning to do a meet-up while I'm down there, but hey, if you're around Brisbane ways, let me know, maybe we can meet up. But otherwise, everybody have a very good end of year. See you in the start of 2019, and stay awesome. That's pretty much it. I'm going to play make up a tune as an outro, and I'll see you guys later. Boom, peace. So let's check that I haven't lost the HDMI signal, and let's do this. Boom, I have not. Let's make a new track. So what should I make here? Let's go for, let's keep it simple. Ooh. There we go. Okay. Quite like that sequence, but it was out of step. There we go. Silent night dumb vision. I'll come back to that one. That's not bad. I quite like that. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you next year. Happy 2019. Remember to like if you liked. That's the show. See you later. Peace.